About 7 rows up, gentleman in the white shirt, Kevin McGill.
Given that if it's inevitable that the possession of nuclear weapons by some countries will be perceived as a threat by some other countries, doesn't being serious about nuclear non-proliferation, whether in Iran or anywhere else, entail being much more serious about bringing an end to any countries having nuclear weapons? And yes. What about this countries, for example?
Yeah, good point. I mean, what you're saying is, can you be serious about nuclear non-proliferation if you're not serious about nuclear disarmament? And you're right. And the good thing is, if I'd been answering this question 2 years ago, it would be much more difficult to answer. Because 2 or 3 years ago, there was absolute deadlock in global multilateral disarmament talks. Actually now, there's much more life in the global disarmament drive because the Russians and the Americans are decommissioning nuclear weapons faster than they have for 40 years. And the passage of the START talks and treaty in Washington is a good thing. The deadlock was broken. I think we should be very serious about multilateral disarmament. And the interesting thing is that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty addresses this directly. There are 3, sorry to be boring about this, but I sort of feel quite strongly about it. There are 3 parts of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. One is non-proliferation, as the name says. Secondly, rights to nuclear power. And thirdly, disarmament responsibilities of the nuclear weapon states, including the UK. Now, there are 4 states outside the Non-Proliferation Treaty: Israel, Pakistan, and India, and one other I can't remember. But they've never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But Iran did. And if you're saying, should we be pursuing global disarmament to zero, happy to say yes to that. Much harder said than done. And the fact that we've now reduced down to an absolute minimum deterrent is a good thing. And we should carry on with the drive for multilateral disarmament.
Thanks. Chap there in the red shirt I'm looking at directly.
My concern is, if you are like a leader of a party, is it possible to clean this image of economic fight that the England and some world potential goes to a country, instead of open the country for dictatorship, they go there for economic pressure of multinational enterprises.
Okay, I think I got it. You're saying, I mean, were the wars fought for economic gain?
Well, I can see that.
Let me answer that. No is the answer.
I think the question is, you're referring to, were those wars about securing economic interests, economic expansion? Is that right?
Yes.
In essence, can we just give David a chance?
I think honestly the answer is no. No country puts its own people at risk for economic interests in that way. That was the doctrine of the 19th century, when military expansion was the route to economic expansion. But honestly, wars are far too expensive to allow for that, in treasure as well as in blood. And honestly, that's not the reason people voted for war in Afghanistan or in Iraq, because it's just not. I mean, I can honestly say that to you. And this thing that, it was for oil, or it's really not true.
A very brief question, the Right Honourable David Miliband. As an MP, what is the hardest ethical conflict you have faced?
The hardest ethical conflict that you face is...
Thank you, Marina.
No, the hardest ethical conflict, in a way, is always easy to is sadly easy to answer, which is about how you protect the country from people who want to do it damage, and who you cooperate with, and what tactics you use in order to do that. Those are the most difficult ones. We are committed. The 2 greatest duties of government are, 1, to keep the people safe, and 2, to uphold the values of the country. And how you resolve that, the hardest thing I've ever done is when not to do intelligence operations because you're concerned about the potential human rights consequences. But in doing that, you're taking risks with the security of your own people. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do.
Thanks.
Can I make a comment? Please stop pushing your pen. It's very distracting.
Yeah, okay. Of course you can, yeah.
Good comment. I like it. I like it. Yeah. Is there anything that I am doing that you don't like? Yeah, I think you've earned the right to ask a question.
I think for a moment we won't let you do that. Gentleman in the yellow at the front. We will come back to you though if you've got one. Gentleman in the yellow.
God, that's pretty...
During your time as Foreign Secretary, did you ever have to encounter the secretive state of North Korea? And secondly, what do you think of the new leader of North Korea?
I mean, basically, I didn't. Sort of in the international system, in the UN Security Council, there's some division of labour. And, you know, we would have taken the lead on Balkans issues or Pakistan, very big issue for the UK, where there's a lot of UK expertise. North Korea, very much a sort of American, Chinese lead, really, Russian lead. I think that, I don't know is the short answer, but no, neither does anyone else. I mean, very young guy, query what's the continuing impact of the people around his father who are still there. Is there anyone here from South Korea or North Korea? No. And he's a mystery, really. And in some ways, you look at him and you think he's got a very tough job because there's no doubt a lot of the bureaucratic state that's left from his father is still there. And it's very unclear what tools he's got, his own mental tools, but also what resources he's got to address a fundamental issue for that country, which has been cut off from the outside world. And if you cut yourself off from the outside world, how on earth do you figure out how to make your way in the modern world?
Lady right in the middle wearing a fawn top.
Hi, I just want to know what Labour's take is on today's news that the CSA look like they're going to start charging lone parents like me to use their services. I mean, I couldn't afford to use it, so the father would get away with paying for my 2 daughters.
Look, I think it's really important because some of the most... Someone asked me about the ethical cases. The saddest cases that I have as an MP, the most frustrating cases are cases where families have broken up and where usually women, but sometimes men, come and see me and tell the most heart-rending stories about money they're not getting, property that's been grabbed, sometimes children's rights that have not, visiting rights that are not being adhered to. And, I mean, sometimes there were problems with the way the CSA worked. The CSA is Child Support Agency. And the problems of the Child Support Agency meant that in 2007, 2008, there was a decision taken to wind it up. And there's now a residual Child Support Agency. But essentially, you're ending up with lots of lone parents with the choice, either you go through the court system, which is why we created the Child Support Agency in the first place, or you have no option to get it back. And now there's a charging, which I think will just actually rebound with fewer and fewer people losing it. Now, the problem with the position now, or one problem with that position, is that there isn't, because the Child Support Agency, I don't know what your experience was with it, it had such a bad reputation, terrible, that we're left with no alternative. Because no one wants to recreate the Child Support Agency. It became a bureaucratic nightmare generally, I have to say, because it was founded on the idea that here's a simple problem, you've got 2 people, they split up, and therefore if one of them still should be paying money in. What happens is that 2 people split up and then they regroup with somebody else, and you end up with extended families and incredibly complicated sort of family situations, and also people are lying and evading their responsibilities. And I mean, I think that there are real dangers in the sort of charging regime. I haven't got a better alternative, that's what I would say.
Ken Harris at the front.
My question relates to sort of like youth unemployment and obviously like tuition fees. With youth unemployment so high, and in September of this year, tuition fees go up to sort of £9,000 plus. not quite that amount here, 8.5 here. But it's going to put the sort of like youth and obviously other people going through higher education in a huge amount of debt, like even before they've got a job. What do you think is the sort of like best message to send to not just the young people, but the adults who are thinking of entering into higher education, trying to create a better life experience for themselves? And would you have did a different method or an alternative method to what the current government's done in terms of putting all the burden of the fees onto the students?
Well, look, I mean, the easy thing for me to say is I completely agree with you. Government are terrible. Fees are terrible. I think, you know, I wish it was better. Now, the trouble with that's not an honest answer, right? That's just not an honest answer, because I think it's right that graduates pay for some of the cost of their higher education. Now, that's why I supported the introduction of tuition fees. But even that language is completely misleading, because there isn't a tuition fee that you pay up front. What we have is a system of loans that are paid back if you get a decent paying job as a graduate. And, I mean, maintenance is a separate issue, so we can come to that. Where I think the current government have gone wrong is in tripling university fees with no real concept of what the consequences are going to be, either for students or for universities. And so the honest answer for you, I think, is to say, look, the £3,000 fee wasn't popular, but given a lot of my constituents and, you know, people in this hall will know, if you want to get training as a 20-year-old that isn't university training, you don't get subsidised for that. And so I think it's right that the taxpayer makes some contribution to higher education, but I think it's right that graduates make some contribution as well. But it's not a tuition fee. It's not an upfront fee. It's something that's paid back. I think in the new system, you've got to be earning £21,000 before you pay anything back. So in Australia, they call it a higher education contribution scheme. But even that suggests it's an upfront contribution. And so I think we've got to put out quite a careful message that the tripling of university fees was never promised by any political party in the general election. In fact, Lib Dems said they were against any fees at all. And that brings politics into disrepute when people do sort of stand on their heads straight after a general election. And I'm very worried about the consequences. But what I can't sit here and say is we should get rid of all contributions by graduates to the cost of their higher education. A portion of the burden, it's not the whole burden actually, because the taxpayer will still be providing various subsidies, including through the interest rates. It needs to be a partnership, in other words, between the taxpayer and the graduate. What I fear is that we're going to end up throwing away one of the greatest strengths of this country, which is this higher education system. And it's a strength both for social mobility as well as for economic competitiveness, and that's the danger.